We're very fortunate today to have two speakers who have an exceptional view of the legal profession. Ben Heineman, who started as the general counsel at General Electric in 1987 and stayed at the company until 2005. With him is Mitch Zuklie, who is the chair of Orrick. Ben Heineman is a senior fellow at Harvard Schools of Law and Government, in addition to his background as a senior vice president at General Electric. He was a senior vice president. He has a new book out called The Inside Counsel Revolution, in which he lays out a lot of the changes that have been taking place inside corporate legal departments over the last 30 years and within the profession. I highly recommend you pick up a book and read it. It lays out his vision, which is quite informative. Mitch is chairman of Orrick, and which is a firm that has been at the forefront of law firm innovation for a very long time. He also represents tech companies and has been very involved in the financing and capital markets and M&A transactions for some of the most successful unicorns and VC startups out there. In 2013, he took over the chair and the leadership of Orrick. He also serves on the advisory boards of Harvard's Law School Center on the Legal Profession, Stanford's Center on the Legal Profession, and the board of the Berkeley Center for Law, Business, and the Economy. You're going to hear how the Inside Counsel movement has reshaped the legal profession from two different perspectives. Please welcome Ben and Mitch.
I'm Ben Heineman. I'm got the short straw, so I'm going to go first. And I'm going to speak very quickly. We're each going to try to speak for 10 minutes and then respond to each other's. And if you've got questions, please ask. The Inside Counsel Revolution has two dimensions. One inside, where the general counsel basically has become top management, deals with business and law, and has become the equivalent of the CFO to the boards of directors and to the CEO. So they're like the CFO of that importance. The second part of the revolution is outside, where power is shifted from outside law firms to inside law departments over both matters and money. Let me talk about the law department law firm relationship today very, very briefly. I want to make 5 very simple points if I can. The first point is that the most important thing is for inside lawyers as they think about allocating resources is segmentation. What are the different kinds of matters across all the different manufacturing, technology, finance, country activities? What is the segmentation of the matters in front of them, from low risk, low complexity to high risk and high complexity? That is the most important thing. The most important thing I want to say today is that depending on the segmentation should be the margins that they pay for those services. The commodity services, there should be low margins. For the super complicated deal, litigation, investigation, there should be high margins. That is the critical thing, and I believe that's what law firms have not really accepted yet and don't really understand. I'm generalizing, some do, of course. And some of the inside law departments don't do that very well. So the first point is segmentation. The second point is you basically have to show to your leaders that cost delivers value. That the law firms think of the relationship between the law firm and the law department, but my most important relationship was not with the law firms. That was way down the line. My most important relationship was with the CEO and the business leaders and the boards. I had to basically deal with them. My life depended on that, and I had to show that cost creates value, whether it's direct value, tax, IP, things like that, reducing costs actually by basically reducing litigation, something like that, or the most difficult thing of all, which is preventing cost, avoiding cost by preventing bad things from happening. So that's the second thing. Cost has to create value, and you've got to show it to business leaders. Third, as you're thinking about allocating resources, you have a lot of alternatives today compared to, I started in 1987. I came from a law firm. Today, we have a lot of alternatives inside in terms of thinking about how to handle matters. One, we can add inside lawyers, and we do, and we have been, number one. Number two, as you know, there are all sorts of non-law firm lawyer capacity that exists out there that you can hire for peaking matters, for routine matters. Thirdly, there is technology platforms of all shapes and sizes. A lot is discussed about that. I don't think much of the legal spend yet is spent on technology despite all the noise, but that is clearly going to increase. Then there are just low margin law firms, not just non-lawyers who work for non-law firms, but low margin law firms. And then finally, of course, there are law firms, or I shouldn't say finally, there are also lots of experts. one of the things that inside lawyers face are very complex problems that go way beyond the law, so that you need to talk to all sorts of experts, scientific, technological, economic, geopolitical, to solve your problems. And those aren't law firms either. So as I sit at the center of a company like GE, which had basically, we were in 120 countries, we had 320,000 employees, I had 1,300 lawyers, 500 tax lawyers, 250 government lawyers, 1,500 EHS lawyers. You know, I had a range of problems that required a wide array of alternatives as I was thinking about it. That's point 3. Point 4 is that I still believe that the law firms and the law departments have very conflicting goals. This has been written about forever, but I think that it still exists. There are clearly great firms where it doesn't exist, but I think as a general proposition, the problem is this, that the law firm, because of the pressure for profits per equity partner, are still trying to do what I would call is less with more. More hours, more leverage, more revenue to feed the beast, okay? And to make sure that in the league tables, their profits per partner are high so that they can keep the business getters. The law departments are completely opposite. We are absolutely bound by global competition and standard productivity, which is more with less. You've all heard it, but it's real. We have to show up, as I said, in budget meetings and all sorts of ways to show we're both effective and efficient in front of our business leaders for us to survive. And so that is a critically important thing. So that's the fourth point is this conflict in values and goals, which I think is absolutely critical. And what I call the productivity disconnect, and which other peoples have called a primal and fundamental tension between law departments and law firms. We've been talking about this forever. I still think it fundamentally exists. Lastly, then, what do we do in terms of if we decided to work with law firms as opposed to all the other alternative providers, which are taken very, very seriously? What do we do about law firms? Well, I believe basically we're still in the world where you hire lawyers, not law firms. That ancient adage still applies as far as I'm concerned. And you need sort of two things, well, maybe three things. You need basically some competition, even if you have a lawyer relationship between them, because you know, cost is still critically important, but so is quality. But you need some competition. You need some kind of partnerships, and without going into great detail, there are provider relationships, there's strategic relationships where books of business are given out, there's strategic integration where the firm and the law department are involved not just in business, but in switching associates, in pro bono, in training, a lot of things. Doesn't happen often. That may be the wave of the future, what I call strategic integration. So there's competition, there are partnerships, and then of course there's cost control, both at the front end and the back end, regardless of the relationship. So I think that that's sort of dictates the sort of the shape of the relationship, but it's still about getting a lawyer. Now, it would be great if you had a lawyer inside of a big firm who took care of your business, and obviously that happens a lot. I was always worried, and I had a lot of experience. I was in big firms, I was in little firms, I was in public interest firms, I was in a big corporation. I was always worried with the lawyer inside the big firm that the pressures of the economic model would lead to overstaffing and overbilling, no matter how careful they were. Didn't always happen. I had wonderful relationships. I don't want to paint with too black a brush or too broad a brush, but I was very worried. So I preferred, if I could have it, a relationship with a boutique firm, with a smaller elite firm who could then work with me to subcontract, even on big matters, to other firms or to other kinds of providers. Because I always felt that the smaller elite firm had great lawyers. They understood the case in a way that sometimes the big firms with casts of thousands didn't understand it. They could bill more per hour or whatever the metric was, but their total costs would be less, and it would be a better result. Now that's a hypothesis. There are lots of things that might refute that, but that was very important to me. But the idea of having that lawyer relationship, law is still personal on things that are important. It is a personal relationship, and for all the changes, that hasn't changed. But these other things are terribly important in terms of segmentation especially, and having lower margins. There are many other things to say about the inside counsel revolution. I hope you will take a look at this book. You might find it interesting. But let me just stop now, having talked about the law firm and law department relationship with those sort of summary ideas. And thank you very much. And I apologize for being a motor mouth, but it's my natural style, but we're also somewhat constrained by time.
So thanks, Ben. It's an honor to be here with everyone today, and an honor to be here with you. And I commend this book to anyone who hasn't had a chance to read it yet. It's obviously a call to action for inside lawyers, but it's also very relevant to those who are thinking about the profession more broadly. And Orrick's a mid-sized firm, neither a boutique nor a particularly large firm. And we live in a world in which the themes that Ben describes are very real. And I'd like to spend a second responding to three things about his book, as well as his comments that I think are relevant. Some are directly on point, some are slightly off. The first is the trend toward differentiation. I think that's something that has started maybe a decade ago and is only accelerating. And I think that differentiation is important. It's something that is happening in law firms. It's critically important to happen at law firms, and it responds to the exact themes that Ben mentioned around some of the trends that are happening with respect to inside counsel. The second is the focus on value. Make no mistake about it. Law firms exist to serve their clients. We are not immune from the world of global competition or economics. Because our clients demand ever-increasing levels of value, we do. Sometimes we're slow to adapt to that change. Occasionally we lead it. Sometimes it's elegant, sometimes it's not. But there's no question that right now there's more happening with respect to focus on value than I think has happened at any other time in the profession of the law. And I'll spend a couple seconds talking about that in greater detail. The third thing I'd like to address is a concept that Ben brings up in his book, which I think is actually the most important for the industry globally. And that's a concept of the lawyer statesman. It's an idea about how people should practice law and what the goals are of having a legal profession. And I want to spend a couple seconds talking about ways in which I think the combination of law schools, law firms, and inside legal departments are actually failing lawyers today, and that's a real cause of concern for those of us who are thinking about the profession and have responsibility for leading it. And that's something, I think, by the way, in which there's no sense of tension. There is an inherent tension, as has been described in some areas. There is not a tension with respect to this issue. So let me start with the issue of distinctiveness. Ben correctly stated that he's not a fan of mega firms, skeptical of the promise of cross-selling and the idea that one global firm can be the best at everything. And I think that most law firms actually share that skepticism. Ben mentioned that client relationships are deeply personal. They're with individual lawyers, and in fact, those are the most rewarding thing for lawyers. They're not with firms. And I think that while there are certainly mega firms that have done well, and certainly Magic Circle and large US-based global firms are doing well, I do think that what we're seeing is in a world of increasing sophistication and better data for in-house teams, there is a preference for people with distinctive knowledge. And that does not only mean with respect to the most high-end matters, it means with respect to all the legal problems you face. And there's a reason that outside law firms exist. It's because we provide certain services that can't be done in-house, even though there's a stunning quality increase, I think, in in-house legal capability over the past decade or so. So there's many different ways in which people can differentiate. The way that we've responded as a mid-sized firm is actually with respect to a focus on sectors. We chose to focus on industries. 3, technology, energy and infrastructure, and finance. And we did that based on a lengthy discussion with a series of our most important clients about what they valued. And typically, they valued deep domain expertise, not simply legal skill. Ben has made reference very eloquently in his book about the fact that lawyers who are in-house know the company much better than outside lawyers do. Of course they do. One of the things that outside lawyers can bring to bear is deep business knowledge about what's happening in a broad industry. And I think that that's only one way to respond with a focus on differentiation by industry, but I think it's been an important response, and it's a critical response, I think, in order to actually provide real value to folks. The other thing I'd say is value. So value is something, of course, which is not a new concept. I do think that for a long time the legal profession was different from a lot of the rest of the world, and that every year rates would increase, irrespective of whether that was something that made sense, and it was atypical. Every time you buy an iPhone, every year it has greater functionality, it's cheaper in cost. And it's strange to think of a profession that's out of whack with the rest of our consumer expectations. I think that has changed in a very dramatic way in the last decade. We as a firm have tried very hard to think about ways to change that. More than 15 years ago, we created the first in U.S.-based sort of offshore global operations center in Wheeling, West Virginia. That's grown from a place where we did some back office work to a very important part of our firm strategically, where we have a very large number of contract attorneys as well as a lot of back office functionality, but providing different ways to think about providing service and not only doing it through in regions where the cost of talent is incredibly high has been important. It was novel 15 years ago, it's no longer novel. We changed about 5 years ago our talent model. Rather than having lockstep increases in associates compensation each year, we decided instead to have compensation increase in connection with 2 meaningful promotions during an associate's career. We partnered with our clients to make sure that they were an important part of that decision of when people would get promoted. It serves our clients better because they know they're paying for people that have real differentiations in skills, not just an increasing year of seniority. And it's made our associates, I think, feel more comfortable about where they are in the firm because we've had to make hard decisions about promotions along the way. Those are just examples of what we do. There are many others, but value is at the forefront of what every law firm thinks about, particularly with respect to pricing. It's changed dramatically. About 1/3 of the stuff that we do right now is on a fixed fee or AFR basis, and I think that's not atypical in the larger world, and I think it's a meaningful change since Ben stepped aside at GE. The last part I want to talk about is this concept of lawyer-statesman and how we cultivate her or him. You do a beautiful job in your book, Ben, of describing this ideal. I think the quote you used was, the ideal lawyer-statesman is an outstanding expert, a wise counselor, and an accountable leader. And you describe a series of competencies that you think that folks need in-house, like the ability to assess enterprise risk, thinking analytically about ethical and reputational issues, exploring the inherent tensions in various decisions, being literate both with respect to business and financial matters, and having a global economy, a sense of a global economy and world cultures. And finally, the ability to get things done and to communicate effectively. To me, all those are absolutely the right skills that we would want in-house as well. And they all come down to a concept of teamwork. And the one issue that I really want to tee up, that I'm grateful for your book because it caused me to reflect on it more deeply, is that I think that right now there's an inherent tension of how well we're training and creating the environment in which these lawyer-statesmen can evolve. Legal education hasn't changed very much, since the days of the Litchfield Law School in the late 18th century. It's a largely individual-driven enterprise. People take tests on their own. Their law school grades determine whether they're on law review. They then leave that environment after 3 years and come to a law firm, and every single thing they do is highly collaborative. You're forced to immediately be part of a team. You're judged on your ability to be part of a team, and you're told by clients, we don't want to pay for you. We don't want to see you actually for a couple of years until you've gained some skills. And we as law firms respond to some of the economic demands by pushing out as an industry the period of time that these folks stay in that job. So they're not well trained for the job. Their partnership promotion is pushed out. Most of them are entering law school with 3 or 4 years of additional experience prior to coming in, and they're nameless and faceless to clients for a number of years. And what's the response to that? Law school enrollment's down 30%. And it's not just a question of people on the margins not going to law school. Some of the very best people don't come to school. We're not creating an environment which is exciting for people to practice, where they feel they've got a rewarding career, that they have deep and lasting relationships with their clients. And that's a huge problem. It's a problem that requires, I think, a meaningful dialogue with leaders from the corporate law world and the in-house side. It requires a change in the way that we practice as law firms, and it requires a fundamental dialogue with law schools. It's not something that we will change with only with one prong of that being responsible for it. It's going to require a meaningful change by all those groups. And I think that unless we are willing to engage in a meaningful dialogue about that and make changes, the profession will continue to be in peril. We will lose the most talented people to companies like Google and Apple, and that will be at our peril. And they will not join as lawyers, they will join as business people. And that's something that I'm grateful for you to raise that issue, but I think there's a clarion call for us as an industry to pay more attention to it.
Mitch, thanks so much for those comments. Let me respond in sort of two parts. Let me talk again, go back to the law firm, law department relationship. I want to make a comment about the mega firms, the big firms, which I think are really a problem and the wrong way to go, because there's going to be a huge mediocre middle. There's not going to be one culture. The cross-sell of geographies and specialties is really fallacious. I don't think it works very well, and I think the sophisticated clients recognize that. So although there is this talk about ever more consolidation, ever greater empire building, I think that's absolutely the wrong way to go, because I think there are so many problems. I think Mitch discussed them, and his firm is trying to avoid some of those problems. And I think that's terribly important. I think related to that is the question, I think for everybody in this room who's in a law firm, is whether you can build a law firm model that takes into account segmentation in different margin businesses. Can you accommodate within your law firm structure the fact that you are going to need to charge sort of different pricing, different margins for different kinds of business? Now, you may choose, if you're an elite firm, to basically operate at the absolute high risk, high complexity level. I think that involves probably a much smaller firm and a specialized firm, and then you can operate there. But some of these big firms who are trying to be all over the world and trying to cover all sorts of areas, they have to make a decision. I think they're going to be forced by good inside law departments, and law departments are not all good, and there's not vision in all of the law departments. But I think good ones are going to be pushing the firms in the way that I discussed, and that involves some very complicated questions about what kind of structure do you have in your law firm organization. Okay. Secondly, let me go back to the sort of lawyer-statesman ideal, because the book really is ultimately just my reflections after many years in the profession about what it means to be a great corporation and what it means to be a great lawyer/citizen. And I say citizen because a lot of the problems that we have to solve go way beyond what the law provides. I mean, yes, we have our legal competencies, but as Mitch mentioned, I'm a great believer in what I call complementary competencies, whether it's financial, technical, scientific, geopolitical. It's critical to really understanding and solving the kinds of problems that a global company has, or that the clients, most of the clients now of law firms have. So critically important that you have this breadth of vision so that you can be both the great expert, the great counselor, and the great leader. So this is really important. Another important sort of normative concept is being the partner and the guardian. You have to be the partner to the CEO, the board, the business leaders, but at the end of the day, you've got to be the guardian of the company. And there's a tremendous tension between those two roles. If you're a partner and you just say yes, you can get indicted, and if you're a naysayer, you get excluded. So there's got to be something in between being indicted and being excluded. And that's sort of what I call the partner-guardian fusion is. I don't have time to get into the details, but it's critically important. And I believe it deeply applies to law firms. Too many law firms today basically want to tell the client what they want to hear. They don't step back and say, well, it may be legal, but is it right? Is it the right thing to do? Are you doing something that makes sense for you? Because they want to keep the business, they don't want to make waves, they want to satisfy the client. That's a dual problem. I always used to preach to our lawyers, especially the ones in the middle who had to manage budgets. Ask your lawyers for wisdom. Ask your lawyers if it's right. Don't just ask them for the legal answer. And I think it's critically important that the partner-guardian issue is critical, it's the core of what we all do in corporations, also applies to law firms, but that law departments have to help them basically give that kind of advice, because otherwise they're going to ask for much more narrow, specialized advice. And related to that, it seems to me that law firms and law departments must cooperate on the critical issue that Mitch mentioned about young people. It's not just that we have lower applications. The LSAT averages are going down. The very best people, and there are many different levels of law schools, of course, but the very best people aren't going necessarily to the very best law schools anymore. They're doing other things, and it's partly because a life in the law, at least in law firms, is not necessarily a happy one. That's not just the law firm's problem. That's the law department's problem too. And I think we need to desperately work together to figure out how to give these people more responsibility, better training, not have crazy bills, but there are all sorts of ways, and we don't have time to discuss them here, but I think what I would say is that the law schools, the law firms, and the law departments must figure out a way to make the first 5 years of practice for people who choose to go this way as opposed to public interest or government work much more interesting, exciting, responsible, and challenging and growth-oriented than we have today. And this is a tremendous challenge for the corporation, for the profession. But it's not the law firm's problem alone. It's certainly the law school's problem and the law department's problems. I would say we have a better chance of changing law firms and law departments than we do law schools. Law schools are hopeless, but that's another subject.
Well, two quick reactions. The first, I think, is I agree with just about everything Ben said, and want to dive in on one point around this push to specialization. It's very hard to have a rich and full life if you immediately are forced to be specialized. And I do think that law departments actually demand more specialization. And so there's a very strong gravitational pull toward becoming specialized earlier in one's career. The problem with that is actually I think that a lot of the benefit people get and their ability to be wise counselors who've got a broad view either comes from deep industry domain experience or it comes from a breadth of experience and the ability to bring judgment. And so we're actually asking for two very different things. There's a core tension between what we're asking for in terms of specialization and the desire to have people who are wise counselors. The second I'd say is there's another major fundamental problem with the legal industry that we rarely talk about and don't do enough to address. And that is that it's a flight of talent. Right now, half the people coming out of law school, even the shrinking numbers of people going to law school, are women. 20% of the people who are partners in big law are women. Maybe 5% of the folks who are in leadership positions in law firm are women. And if you look at those who are the most highly compensated law firms, it tends to reflect about that same bias. That's a major drain of talent from the legal industry with respect to gender. It's one that I think we as leaders, as law professionals, whether we're in legal departments, whether in law firms, have to pay a serious amount of attention to, because it doesn't serve our clients well, and it doesn't serve the industry well, and it certainly doesn't serve society well. I'm afraid, actually, Ben, that we've already filled our time.
Anyway, I think just to maybe say the last word, I think that our responsibility to the young people is something that we really need to think, all of us need to ponder greatly. We have sort of lawyers, as lawyer statesmen, we have 4 ethical responsibilities to our companies and its employees, basically to all the other stakeholders or clients, to the administration of law and rule of law and the system of justice, and then to social goods that are critical to to private enterprise. I mean, we have a mixed economy, and we have for 180 years, and we're going to continue to have it. So we have those responsibilities. But in terms of one of the most important of those ethical responsibilities is to young people in the profession, because I hope everybody in this room has had a wonderful life in the law, and we've got to make sure that that's true for the generations that's following us.
I'll leave with one last word. I think Ben's book is well worth reading. These issues are of topic to you. So, thank you.
Thank you, guys.